While Carlos Santana's guitar has been a source of healing for many years, what happens when the man behind the music needs to heal himself? At age 77, Santana finally peeled back the layers of his life, revealing a truth that many of us may have felt in his music but never fully understood. What Santana has revealed now isn't just a chapter of his life. It's the key to understanding the soul behind the sound. Let's go on a journey into the untold story of Carlos Santana. A true legend's every chord is a cry, every riff is a revelation, and every word is a glimpse into their heart. There's something sensational about legends. They have an air of mystery that makes us hang on their every note, word, and move. Carlos Santana is one of those legends. For decades, his guitar has been a beacon, weaving together rock, blues, and Latin rhythms in a way that feels almost divine. Carlos Santana was born on July 20, 1950, in the small, sun-drenched town of Outland, Mexico. In 1947, life was simple but full of culture, and music could be heard everywhere. His father, Jose Santana, was a skilled mariachi musician who played the violin with a passion that seemed to flow through his veins. For Jose, it wasn't just a job, it was a way of life. He wanted his children to follow in his footsteps, so he gave Carlos a violin when he was 5 years old and watched him practice. But as much as Carlos admired his father's talent, the violin didn't quite speak to him. It felt more like a chore than a way to express himself. But life has a funny way of... When Carlos was 8 years old, he picked up the guitar and everything changed. As he grew up, Carlos wasn't just exposed to music, he was immersed in it. He spent hours listening to traditional Mexican songs and soaking up the rhythms and melodies of modern music. At the same time, the radio introduced him to American blues and rock artists like B.B. King, T-Bone Walker, and Little Richard. These different styles started to shape his unique sound, a mix of cultures that would later define his music career. But Carlos' life in Houston wasn't easy. His family was poor, and they weren't rich, and like many families of that time, they had to work hard just to make ends meet. His father was performing at different events and wasn't able to keep up with his son's guitar lessons. Then, an American man became friends with the young Santana and acted like a trusted adult. Over time, the abuse happened, leaving the young Carlos confused, ashamed, and emotionally broken. It's important to understand this. The abuser took advantage of Carlos's trust and the innocence of his childhood. He did this by pretending to be a friend and protector to get close to Carlos and then luring him into situations where he could be abused, often by saying he could help or guide him. This process of grooming Carlos made him feel trapped and unable to understand what was happening or how to escape it. The emotional toll was terrible. He felt alone and burdened with a secret he couldn't share, which caused him to feel a deep sense of shame that lasted for years. As a result of the abuse, he felt unworthy and mistrustful of others, which made it hard for him to trust people and feel safe. When his family found out about this, they made the life-changing move to Tijuana and then to San Francisco in the early 1960s. Like many immigrant families, they had to deal with a lot of problems. But one of the biggest was making ends meet. Carlos, eager to help out and find his place, took on a series of menial jobs to support himself and his family. His first job was every day, Carlos stood over a hot sink and scrubbed plates and silverware. It wasn't glamorous work. The pay was low, the hours were long, and the kitchen was often a chaotic whirlwind of clattering dishes and barking orders. But he did it with quiet determination. It wasn't just a job for him, it was a way to contribute while he pursued his dream of becoming a musician. But he wasn't just good at dishwashing. He had worked as a street musician in Tijuana before moving to San Francisco. Francisco would take his guitar on the weekends and play for tips in bars, clubs, and parks. He wasn't just practicing his craft, he was making a living. His performances were honest and emotional, mixing traditional Mexican music with the blues and rock influences he loved. In the evenings, after washing dishes, he'd often go to jam sessions in San Francisco's growing music scene. It was the 1960s, a time when the city was full of counterculture energy and musical experimentation. Santana would bring his guitar to small gatherings. He played for free for hours on end to get known. One of the most surprising jobs he took was as a janitor at Mission High School, the school he had gone to. It was embarrassing to clean the halls where he had once walked as a student, but Carlos didn't let the irony get to him. He saw it as a necessary step on his journey. His first real gig came when he formed the Santana Blues Band. At the time, San Francisco was a center for cultural and musical experimentation, and places like the Fillmore West was famous for showcasing new, cutting-edge talent. The Santana Blues Band started playing in small clubs and bars, becoming known for their unique blend of Latin rhythms, blues, and rock. Carlos's passionate, soulful guitar playing became the band's trademark, and word started to spread that they didn't get paid much. Tips were enough for them. They were making music, and that was all that mattered. The turning point came at the famous Fillmore West in 1966, a legendary venue known for launching the careers of many artists thanks to Bill Graham. Graham was a famous concert promoter who would play a key role in Santana's career. He had a knack for finding talented people, and when he saw the Santana Blues Band perform, he knew they were something special. He invited them to play at the Fillmore, which was the starting point for many of the biggest acts of the time. In 1966, Santana's band got their big break playing there, and people couldn't get enough of their sound, which was a mix of Latin rhythms, blues, and rock that felt completely new. Carlos's guitar solos were mesmerizing, full of emotion and fire. Graham, a famous concert promoter who would play a key role in Santana's career, had a knack for finding talented people. When he saw the Santana Blues Band perform, he knew they were something special. He invited them to play at the Fillmore, a venue that was the launching pad for many of the era's biggest acts. But it was Woodstock in 1969 that changed everything. Carlos was only 22 years old when his band was called up to play at the now iconic festival. Interestingly, they weren't even supposed to play that early in the lineup, but they were pushed onto the stage before Carlos felt ready. He hadn't even had time to come down from a hallucinogenic trip, which he later said made the experience surreal. But as soon as he struck the first chord, the crowd was hooked. Their performance of Soul Sacrifice became one of the most memorable moments of the festival. The intense energy and raw passion made it seem like Carlos's whole life had been building up to that moment. What made the Woodstock performance even more impressive was the chaos that Carlos later admitted he had been through behind the scenes. Psychedelics before going on stage made the experience strange and difficult, but he still put on a show that would go down in rock history. After Woodstock, Santana's career took off. He and his band signed a deal with Columbia Records in 1969, with a lot of help from their manager and devoted fan, Bill Graham. That same year, Santana performed at Woodstock, and their electrifying performance of Soul Sacrifice made them famous right away. The performance was later immortalized in the Woodstock movie showed a huge audience, the band's contagious energy and Carlos's blazing guitar skills. Their self-titled debut album Santana 1969 came out soon after and included the hit single Evil Ways. The album's mix of rock, Latin percussion, and blues reached number 4 on the Billboard 200 chart and stayed there for over 2 years, solidifying Santana's place in the music world. Their second album, Abraze 1970, took their success to even higher heights and included iconic songs like Black Magic Woman, a cover of a Fleetwood Mac song that Carlos sang on. Oi Como, a reimagined version of the Tito Puente classic of Brass, went to #1 on the Billboard charts, sold millions of copies, and made Santana a household name. His third album, Santana I31971, continued the winning streak, with hits like No One to Depend On and Everybody's Everything. During this time, guitarist Neil Schon joined the band, creating a dual guitar dynamic that gave their sound more depth. As Santana's fame grew, Carlos started to explore spirituality and incorporate those ideas into his music. While Caravanserai 1972 was a big change from the band's earlier work, it was praised by critics for its jazz fusion, experimental arrangements, and meditative themes. Even though it didn't do as well in the charts, it showed Carlos's willingness to take risks. While Santana's career was on the rise, his personal life was anything but. We often think of icons like Carlos Santana as untouchable living legends who seem to breeze through life. But the truth is that even the most talented people have to work hard to achieve their goals. One of Carlos's battles was with addiction. Back then, drugs were practically woven into the fabric of the music industry. For Carlos, the pull wasn't just about fitting in or getting high, it was about finding a way to cope. He later admitted that he used drugs to escape feelings of loneliness and stress, and to silence the noise in his head when life felt too much. It wasn't long before the occasional indulgence turned into dependency. Drugs became a crutch, and Carlos found himself in a vicious cycle. Carlos's body was suffering from addiction, and it also affected his relationships and music. What turned things around for him wasn't just one moment, but a series of choices and realizations. Spirituality played a big role in his recovery. When Carlos became deeply involved with Indian guru Sri Chinmoy in the early 1970s, Deborah stood by his side. Deborah was the daughter of famous blues guitarist Saunders King, and she came from a musical family, which probably made an instant connection between the two. They got married in 1973 and had a relationship that would last for more than 30 years. Deborah became a steady and supportive presence in Carlos's life as his fame grew. Together they had 3 children, Salvador, Stella, and Angelica, and Deborah was a big part of managing Carlos's personal and professional life. Chinmoy's teachings, which stressed meditation, self-discipline, and devotion to the divine, really spoke to Carlos when he was looking for more meaning in his life. Deborah stood by him as he made a promise to the divine. Guru's spiritual practices, such as becoming a vegetarian, meditating every day, and even taking on the spiritual name Deva Deep. During this time, Carlos worked with jazz greats like John McLaughlin and Miles Davis, which deepened his exploration of jazz and spirituality. The 1973 album, Love, Devotion, and Surrender, which he made with Maine, was inspired by their mutual devotion to Indian spiritual leader Sri Chinmoy and showed their shared interest in combining music with spiritual practices. However, Carlos eventually broke up with Sri Chinmoy. In the 1980s, he was trying to find his own way. The spiritual foundation he gained during this time helped him face his addiction head-on. He started to see drugs not as an escape, but as a barrier to the clarity and connection he craved. Slowly, he worked to reclaim his life, focusing on his health, relationships, and music. Have you ever thought about how personal struggles shape the music we love? The mid to late 1970s were a rough time for Santana. Creative differences and internal tensions caused many original band members to leave, while Carlos had trouble balancing his spiritual pursuits with the demands of the music business, but he stayed dedicated to his craft and tried out new styles and collaborations to keep his sound fresh. By the 1990s, Santana's career had slowed down, but Carlos wasn't done yet. In 1999, he released Supernatural, a collaborative album that introduced him to a new generation of listeners with a flavor that was so distinctive. Not one last time. Supernatural, which included hits like Smooth with Rob Thomas and Maria with G&B, became a worldwide hit, selling over 30 million copies and winning 9 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. It was a stunning comeback that proved Santana's music could connect with people of all ages. For a long time, Carlos Santana struggled to reconcile the pain of his childhood with his sense of who he was. The emotional wounds those early experiences left behind weren't just scars, they were deep, raw parts of who he was. These battles shaped not only his personality but also his music. It wasn't until much later in life that Carlos started to talk about his past. In interviews over the years, he's shown glimpses of the darkness he endured. That kind of trauma doesn't just go away. Carlos has said that for much of his early life, he felt like he was living in a fog, trying to protect himself from the world while also longing for connection. In a 2000 interview, he bravely broke decades of silence by talking about the abuse. It wasn't easy, but he did it. He realized that holding it in was only giving it more power over him. When words failed him, his guitar spoke for him. Those raw, aching notes you hear in his solos aren't just sounds, they're his soul crying out. His pain gave his music an honesty that connected with people on a deep, almost spiritual level. But it seems that wasn't the only way Carlos dealt with his feelings. He was cheating on his wife Kings and she didn't know about it. In interviews, he admitted that he had made mistakes during their marriage and talked about it. He felt bad about what he did and admitted that it hurt Deborah. In her 2005 memoir, Between the Stars, Deborah wrote honestly about her experiences as Carlos's wife, describing how she felt neglected and undervalued at times, especially as she juggled her role as a mother, partner, and supporter of his career. Over time, it became clear that Carlos and Deborah were growing in different ways. Carlos's spiritual journey and changing views on life didn't always match Deborah's. Even though she tried to help him, the emotional distance between them became too much to overcome. In 2007, the couple decided to split up. The divorce was friendly, and both parties expressed gratitude for the years they had spent together. Carlos later said that losing Deborah was one of the worst things that had ever happened to him, and that it made him reevaluate his priorities. Deborah continued to work as an author and philanthropist, while Carlos focused on his music, spirituality, and personal growth. In 2010, Carlos and Deborah split up. Carlos recently remarried drummer Cindy Blackman, who is known for her work with Lenny Kravitz. Their relationship has brought him new happiness, and he has often talked about how important it is to love, forgive, and learn from mistakes. But it seems that the universe took his words too seriously, because in December 2021, Carlos Santana had heart surgery to fix a problem with his heart. He had to cancel several tour dates because of this. He told his fans what was going on, thanked them for their support, and said he was taking some time to rest and heal. After a few months of rest, he returned to performing stronger and more focused than ever. The experience was a wake-up call for him, and he took the time to think about his health and his life. A few months later, in July 2022, fans at a concert in Michigan got a real scare when Santana suddenly collapsed on stage during a performance. He was suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. It was a sobering moment, and at 75, Santana was still giving his fans. He gave it everything he had, but his body needed a break. Thankfully, he got better and reassured everyone with his signature, "Just taking it easy, I'll be back soon." Then came 2023, a different test for Santana. During a performance, he said things about gender identity that caused backlash. It was one of those times when words, maybe spoken in a stream of consciousness, took on a life of their own. The comments were seen as insensitive by many, leading to widespread criticism. Social media went crazy, and it wasn't long before Carlos Santana got into trouble. But here's the thing. He's always been someone who owns up to their mistakes. He apologized in public, making it clear that his goal was never to hurt or divide. In his own words, he said, "I want to honor and respect all people's ideals and beliefs." Was that enough for some? No, it wasn't for others. The damage had already been done. But what stands out is his willingness to admit his humanity. As fans, it's easy to put someone like Carlos Santana on a pedestal, but moments like this make us think. These things remind us that he's a person first and an icon second. It's his flaws that make his story so relatable, don't you think? After all, life is a journey, and stories like Santana's show us that even when we fall, there's always a way to get back on track. Maybe that's the magic of Carlos Santana. No matter what's going on, he can turn the noise into music.